Oh, Max.
Let's get it on. 3, 2, 1. Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Agents of Recovery podcast. It's Coach Blue Robinson here, mental health therapist. I am so thankful for you guys to join us, listening to the thoughts, the opinions, the instructions that the Agents of Recovery might bring. Please share this with anyone who may be struggling with mental health issues, addiction, and specifically those who really want to change their lifestyles from becoming a victim of addiction to an agent of sobriety. We have got some great stuff on tap today, but first let's introduce the co-host to the Agents of Recovery, Max Hall. Max, how you doing down there, brother?
Man, I'm doing great. Just sitting here what you just said. Man, listeners, please share this. Post about it. Tag us. Do whatever you can because, I mean, some of what we talked about today, we got to get word out, and people got to know what's going on, and we can reach a lot of people. So please help us get it out. Share it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Max. And as always, Brock Bevel. Brock, going to be a passionate one today, brother.
Man, I'm hot. I'm hot already. Like, seriously, I just want to get going on this because it pisses me off, dude.
It does. So, listeners, today...
So, welcome. Thanks for having me, guys. I guess I should... Yeah, listeners out there, what's up, man? Thank you for listening to us. And like Max said, please share this with people, man. I think it's... If you're unaware of the topic we're going to talk about, I'm going to ask you to just look up, get off your phone, pay attention for this hour.
Absolutely.
Please.
So, listeners, today we're going to jump into some hot topics. It's going to be some current events, things that we are noticing. And as agents of recovery, each of us in our own perspective way, we keep our pulse on what's going on in our communities, in our states, in our nation. And I'm telling you out there, listeners, we're losing the battle. Because as we're being distracted by so many other things, and trust me, I get the pandemic, I understand it, COVID-19, it's a rough thing, but we are dealing with such evil out there that if you really compared the two, from COVID-19 to the pandemic, to the epidemic of opiate and now fentanyl abuse, you'd find that there's no comparison in loss of life, in danger, in threat, and it's all happening under each and every one of our noses. And if you haven't heard about the fentanyl issue that's now plaguing our country, you are way behind the curve. We're going to jump into some current events. We've got some pretty intense discussions I know that are going to follow this. And if you've been following Brock Bevel at all, you've noticed that he's now kind of taken personal charge, trying to educate and bring awareness to the fentanyl epidemic. Brock, let's start with you. We've got a current event happening back east that is just absolutely gut-wrenching. And I'll guarantee you that half of the listeners out there, if not more than half, have never heard of what fentanyl is, how dangerous it is, and how we should really maybe stop arguing about, wearing masks or not wearing masks or vaccinations, and we should really start focusing on a tremendous issue at hand, the abuse, the presentation of fentanyl.
Yeah, and what's funny is fentanyl is evolving. I don't know
what
if you
is
know
it, Brock?
that.
Let's talk about it right from the get-go. What is fentanyl?
Well, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. So it's basically what you're getting from hydrocodone and Oxycontin, any of those. And what's happened is it's being manufactured in a lab. Most of it's being manufactured in a lab. It comes across the U.S. border, usually in a powder state. They take that powder state and they smash it into other drugs. They sprinkle it on however they want to do it. So back in the day, when we were smoking weed as little kids, we weren't worried about smoking fentanyl. But today, the drug dealers, they understand that there is a massive hook. Opioids or fentanyl has been said to be 50 to 100 times more powerful than morphine. If you were snow skiing or you're in an automobile accident and you break your femur, the largest bone in your body, and you snap it in half, you go to the hospital, the first thing they're going to give you is morphine, more likely than not. It is the best painkiller, right? So basically now we're taking something that's 100 to or 50 to 100 times more potent, and we're mixing it in a tiny pill. Okay, if that tells you anything.
It's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. And now what we're seeing, it's in marijuana, it's in cocaine, it's in methamphetamines, it's in every single drug out there. And the problem is this, we're unaware of what it's in.
Yeah.
So basically our kids are playing Russian roulette, hoping, man, I hope I just got an opioid. I hope I got this one directly prescribed from my doctor. I took it out of my mom's medicine cabinet. Grandma had it, right? And they're hoping that's what they get it in. But it's not happening. Look at the news. So the big thing that I'm frustrated about, 13-year-old boy. Now, this case is evolving as we hear
It's like
it.
in real time right now.
Right. Right now, because it's a couple weeks removed, but initially we heard that there was 3 youth from Connecticut that overdosed on fentanyl in a high school, in grade school. 13-year-olds, 7th graders. Police come in, they do an investigation, they remove the child from the school, he ends up dying. Overdoses on fentanyl. Autopsy proves it, no problem. They do a search of the school and they find 40 bags throughout the school.
Did they find those bags on other kids, Brock, or just...
No, they found them like hidden in different, like in the gym and the bathrooms and these different places.
So he was having little spots where he was stacking them to sell them. Gotcha. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was the end of the case from what we heard in the news. A 13-year-old, drug-dealing 13-year-old dies of an apparent fentanyl overdose. A couple days later, we hear that the police do a search warrant on his house. In his room, they uncover 100 more bags of fentanyl. That's 140 total bags. A 7th grader. Guys, we're not talking about a career criminal in the Mexican mafia or a cartel. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of dope. They interview mom. Mom's like, guys, she's not a suspect. She had no idea this was happening. So the goal of this podcast is to raise some freaking awareness. Like, guys, it's out there. It's in our homes. It's in the streets. It's in your schools. It's in your churches. It is everywhere. And you got to wake up and you got to see it and you got to take care of it and you got to talk to your kids.
I want to ask Max a question with this. Brock, it's a heartbreaking story. I hadn't heard about this until you said, hey, go check this out. And Max, this is a question for you. But the story says after a 13-year-old boy died from fentanyl overdose in Connecticut Middle School, Hartford police said they found an extra 100 bags of fentanyl in a teenager's room. Brock, you're right. That means like, okay, mom, dad, where are you? But I think that's a cop out these days. And I'm not saying your parents, we should know what our kids are doing. We should know what hobbies they have. But I also know that a lot of these kind of substances, this isn't the same kind of drug use and pot smoking that we used to have. This is a whole different level. And I know that people can be upset with like parents for this kind of stuff, but Max, you work with kids this age. You work with teenagers. Just when we were a couple weeks ago out in Delta, I was watching you train some of these quarterbacks out there. You see and you understand the rhythm of some of these kids and these mindsets. When you hear this kind of a story, I know that you aren't persecuting a parent. I know you're not demonizing the kid. What goes through your mind when you hear this, comparable to like not just your own children, but like the kids that you coach at the school that you're at right now? I mean, what do you think when you see this young having such tragedy?
It makes me sad, if I'm being honest. Being around youth, even from my own son who's in 5th grade all the way up to the high school kids, and some of my players go to college and come back, and I've tried to take opportunities to mention it and to talk to them about it, because here's the other thing is I got to be realistic with these kids. You know what I mean? I can't get in front of them all the time and be like, don't do drugs, don't drink, and think that they're all going to not do drugs and not drink or whatever. They all have issues with it and they go through it. But for them, they can't just get it. So they're getting it off the streets, which makes them more prone to potentially running into something that was laced with fentanyl. And Brock brought up how fentanyl is 50 to 100 times more potent. Well, guess what? That makes it super, super addictive, more addictive than Oxycontin or even heroin. So the drug dealers or whoever they are that are lacing all these other drugs with this stuff, they understand that it's way more addictive and they're getting people hooked so that they can make more money, right? And it's killing our youth. But, when I hear about this mom, she's like, I had no idea. I think there's a lot of parents out there who have no idea what their kids are really into. Being a coach and a mentor and around these other kids, I know things about some of my players that their parents don't know because they're just not quite comfortable going to their parents. But I think because of my past and some of the things that I've been through, they feel more comfortable sharing some of that stuff with me. And obviously I encourage them to talk to their parents. I'm not trying to keep a secret or whatever, but encourage them. But it just goes to show, parents, you have to have this conversation with your kids. Like I just said, I have an 11-year-old son, 10-year-old daughter, and I feel like I'm right here about to have another conversation about this stuff with them. And they know all about my past and drug addiction and all that, but I got to raise awareness with it because, you know, what was really interesting, Blue, and I brought this up, I think, before, but Marissa shared a picture with us, and it was a penny, right? And next to the penny was this little, small, tiny little pinch of salt of powder. And that was, what did she say? That was enough to cause an overdose. That was a lethal dose of fentanyl. And so when these, like, take this 13-year-old kid, for example, he's got all these bags and he's going around selling them. None of the kids know the potency of it. None of them, you know what I'm saying? Like, who knows how they're using it or what they're doing with it or what they're putting it on or what combinations could be deadly with it. So it makes me frustrated. It makes me, in a way, feel a little bit helpless for some of these kids because I can't do it all on my own. Rock can't do it. Blue can't do it. This has to be a team effort, a community effort to raise awareness of this stuff. I don't care how taboo you may feel it is. It's got to be talked about because if it is talked about and parents are educated and can understand the signs of drug use, then I think we can get ahead of some of this stuff and save some lives, Blue.
But that's the thing, Brock. Max, I'm glad that you brought up that picture. Listeners will post this on the Agents of Recovery social media sites. But think of a penny, and then think of Abraham Lincoln. Think of just enough powder to cover his nose. Yeah. That's all that it's going to take to ruin life. And it really is, listeners, it's hitting the youth of America. It's hitting the younger adults. It's ages, like 13 all the way up to about 25, 30 that are in this demographic. But it's non-discriminatory. It goes throughout. But those are the ones that are getting hit the most with it because you're right. It's being hit so hard on things that we would use and abuse anyway that you don't know what's in it. And I'm sure that there's different potencies and content in it because it's being a mad rush to be produced. Brock, you brought up a good question, though, before we started recording. Okay, why? We know that when stuff like this happens, we have to follow a trail. You got law enforcement. Tell us a little bit about that angle because I'm curious, like, Brock, how in the world do we get ahead of this? Because we're behind the curve.
Yeah, we're in trouble. And that's why prevention, that's why communicating with your kid, because it's here. Guys, Arizona Poison Control, their center yesterday warns of a spike in overdoses. Like, no shit. Yeah. Really, this was 16 hours ago. And it's like, dude, it pisses me off. Like, how far are you behind? Now you're telling people about this? And how many people are going to hear it?
Not many. If they don't listen.
So check this out. In December, Scottsdale PD and Phoenix PD had a record number of seizure they ever have made in Arizona. Listen to this, 9.5 million counterfeit pills have been seized in Arizona since January 2021. Okay, did you hear that? That's a lot of freaking drugs,
Say
guys.
that again, dude.
And
Say that again.
Yeah. So this was a record fentanyl seizure by DEA, Phoenix, Scottsdale PD, and the Arizona Attorney General's office announces a nationwide public safety surge over 9.5 million counterfeit pills. Now, counterfeit pills are what we're seeing. So a counterfeit pill would be something that's been touched, that's been altered, that has hazardous chemicals, drugs in it. It's not what you're getting from the doctor. Okay. And that's the problem. That's what our kids are not getting. They're getting these counterfeit pills. And so here's the funny thing is, if you just look in Arizona this month, Arizona State Troopers seized 666 pounds of meth and 37 pounds of fentanyl. Fentanyl's a fatal fallout. 3 arrested in Avondale drug bust. And like every single article in the news is all Arizona. And it's like thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. Now, here's the scary part that people don't understand. We talk about investigations, right? What is always following fentanyl or any drug? 2 other things.
Money?
Weapons. If you read these articles, every one of them are saying Pancho or whatever was arrested with 37 pounds of fentanyl, 2 AR-15s, and $1 million in cash. We're talking big money, and that's all we're seizing. This is the police doing the best they can to do everything they can that's coming through the southern border, right? It's coming into our streets. Obviously, it's coming into our schools. It's coming into our homes. And so it's like, guys, listen, the police can only do so much. They can only do so many investigations. They're understaffed, overwhelmed. And so that's why it falls on us as parents. That's why it falls on us to get the word out. Because the problem is, if you go sit down with the majority of parents today, they have no clue what fentanyl is.
Or they may have heard the word, but they don't know what it really is, right, Brock?
Sure. But I bet you if you ask their kids, every single one of them know what it is.
That is hard to wrap your head around, these kind of numbers, this kind of issue. Brock, I'm curious about this. How in the world did we let our guard down to let this stuff slip in? It's been here for a while, but now it's coming in like a tsunami. I mean, what did we miss? Were we preoccupied on something else? Were we looking a different direction? I mean, what do you think, how do you think this happened? What the hell happened here? It sucker punched
Max,
us.
go ahead. Max wants to shout out right here.
Well, no, I just had a thought, and I forget thoughts quickly, so I wanted to get this out.
I love it.
I think about when I was using, okay, and think about this. It started off with Percocet, then it went to Oxy. Then, I was introduced to other pills, Opana, which is oxymorphone, pretty much the same thing, a little stronger. But here's the problem. Like the doctors and whatever, everybody's been trying to crack down on prescribing opiates, right? So as I went along in my addiction, Oxycontin got harder and harder to find because not as many doctors were prescribing it. And so that's why eventually everybody goes to heroin, because it's easier to get and it's cheaper, okay? So I am so thankful that this stuff wasn't around when I was using, because there's a very good chance I'd be dead if this stuff was around. I remember the word fentanyl being brought up, but for some reason I remember it being like a lollipop or something that you would get from the hospital, something you like sucked on like a sucker. And I remember a couple guys bringing it up, but it was not a thing. So what I think is happening is because there's not as many pills on the streets, okay, the cartel or whoever you want to call was like, hey, I got an idea. Let's take this fentanyl crap. Let's print these pills that look exactly like the Oxy 30s, which, if you don't know, an Oxy 30 is a little round blue pill. The most popular one has an M printed on it. And then there's one with a K. There's like a few other ones, okay? So they make them look exactly like these Oxy 30s. And all of a sudden, they're back out on the streets. And people are like, oh, these are great. Let's go get some Oxy. And they don't know that all it is a bunch of junk with some fentanyl sprinkled into it. So that's why I think fentanyl is becoming more popular, because of how hard it is to get, because they're trying to crack down on prescribing Oxycontin.
And Max, you're right. It's supply and demand.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's economics. This isn't hard to figure out. When it's not on the streets, you got to create it. And so if you're looking now, when they're making these arrests, a lot of them have these pill presses that the DEA uses for, I mean, it's a pharmaceutical grade pill press. And these guys have them in there. I mean, Google it, man. It's not, we're not just shooting you just crap to scare the hell out of you. It's true.
Yeah.
These guys are filling these pill presses. They're stamping the blues, and that's what everybody's on, right? You go to the streets and you talk, hey, what are you hooked on? Dude, I'm on blues, man. I can't get off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's all fentanyl. And here's the scary part. You ready to hear what's really scary?
Yeah.
Carfentanil
Carfentanil
is the next thing coming in.
What's this?
So we have this fentanyl, which is 150 to, I mean, everything you read, it's different. It's like 50 to 60, 70 times more powerful than morphine. Okay, basically it's killing people. Carfentanil is 10,000 times more potent than morphine. 10,000 times. So now the cartels are like, hold on a second, or I won't even blame it just on the cartels. The drug dealer's like, wait a minute. If fentanyl is 100 times, we can make something way more powerful. So let's make it 10,000 more times powerful, and let's keep everybody hooked. So carfentanil is coming in. The DEA just kicked out issued a warning last week about this. Hey, police, listen, this stuff is coming. If you were concerned about touching fentanyl, get it on your hands, ingesting it, now you really need to worry. So, Max, you're absolutely right. We're creating a bigger, faster, stronger drug, just like we're trying to do with athletes. They're doing it with drugs. It's cheaper to buy, longer high. There you go.
Man.
I mean, who's not going to? You would have. If you were there, you would be banging that out.
Yeah.
Dude,
No,
that's
true.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying. It scares me to death because I can think of days in my addiction where I couldn't find either. I couldn't find pills. I couldn't find any black. And so if that stuff was around, I would have used it. Absolutely, I would have used it because of where I was at, and I didn't care. Oh, it's an opiate? Give me that. I'll take it.
I'm in.
So that's what's scary about the addicts right now is you can't find it, you go into withdrawal, ain't nothing holding you back from going to fentanyl. Absolutely not. I wouldn't have. And so the cartel, you're right, Brock, they're adapting. They're like, okay, well, let's take this stuff that's way more potent, cheaper, and let's create, let's make it look like we're still selling the same thing. And they're doing it in heroin too. Like instead of making heroin, I read some article about it. They're putting whatever junk is in these boogers that you buy in heroin. You know what I mean? And they're just lacing it with fentanyl. There's no opium plant. It's laced with fentanyl, and that's what scares me the most. The other thing that really scares me, having a kid, 2 kids that are soon to be teenagers, with this stuff around, and I hope as we keep listening, I'm going to have the talk with my kids. I have to. Because this stuff is so scary and easy to get. And if 13-year-old kids are taking it to their junior high school, and you hear of all these stories of all these drug busts in Arizona and all these kids dying or ODing or whatever, your kids will come across it. Not might, they will. And they have to be prepared for that moment to know how dangerous it is to stay away from it. Because
okay, hold on. Max, stop there for a second because you said 2 things that don't skip over this now. Okay. The first thing you said is you got to have this conversation. Tell me, what does this conversation look like? Because there's parents out there going, Max, dude, please, how do I open this conversation up? What do I say to them? I'm not educated. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I know I need to have this conversation. And then you said, my kids have to be prepared.
Yeah.
They got to know what's going on. So because we're experts, we know what's going on. Like, how do parents open up this conversation with their kids?
It's a great question. And you're right. I think it is easier for me. It's easier for you guys to do it. So the first thing, and we've talked about this before, do some research. Look up the articles. Find the police reports. Even if you don't know a lot about it or how it works, look at the news articles of what it is doing to other people. And then I'm gonna take them both. I'm gonna sit them down. I'm like, guys, I want to have a pretty serious conversation with you. I need to warn you guys about something. Okay? There's this. Obviously, I've talked to them about drugs and addiction and all that, and I would say there's this new thing, this new drug that is going around right now called fentanyl. It is the most powerful, most deadly, destructive drug that has ever been created. And I want you guys to be aware of this stuff, because if you ever come across it, I want you to run, because it potentially would kill you. Even if you touch it. Even if you touch it and then touch your eye or your mouth or something, it could kill you. And I care about you guys. I love you. I just want you to understand and have knowledge of what this stuff is and what it could do to you. So please stay away from it, and know that no matter how cool your friends might think or say it is, or no matter how much peer pressure you might have to do it, I want you to think that if you try that, it could kill you on the spot. Would be the basis of what I told those kids. Not only they need to have knowledge, and they need to be scared. And I think those two things will help them make a decision if it ever comes, or when they come across it one day.
It's an interesting thing you bring up, you guys, and Max, well said, Brock. This is something I work with almost on a daily basis as in my private practice. Listeners, for this kind of stuff, you've got to keep it age appropriate. Okay. And so, you're not going to roll into your kindergartner or sixth grader and freak him out by showing him pictures of dead bodies and overdoses and things. Please, you should start by talking to your kids about substance abuse early in their lives. If you have older kids, you may have missed the curve, but that doesn't mean that you can't. Now, here's the deal too. A lot of time there are warning factors that come into these kind of things. And just because there are risk factors to your family system doesn't mean that all risk factors determine your child's destiny. But things like family history, drug and alcohol problems can definitely be placed, I think, in a child's path if you have a history of it. If there's mental health issues, we're talking about depression, anxiety, ADHD, these kind of issues, or even traumatic events. If your child or yourself have experienced any kind of traumatic issue, from car accident to natural disaster to the loss of someone, we haven't even touched base on all the kids that have been left behind because their parents, their primary caregivers, have died due to this stuff. We are going to have a very big issue coming up in the next 5 to 10 years with what's called the opiate orphans coming of age in a crucial time where they don't have their primary caregiver anymore because they've passed away due to substance use. And then, of course, if your child or yourself suffer from any kind of impulse control issues. So as you kind of apply these factors, you've got to keep it age appropriate. You got to be clear about the rules and the reasons why this stuff is so bad. Your kids should have no doubts where you stand on substance use. So if you're a recreational marijuana smoker, guess what your kids are going to be? If you're a recreational drinker, guess what your kids are going to be? And so it's going to be kind of hard. The do as I say, not as I do factor doesn't work anymore. You got to lay down the law and be clear about your stance on this kind of situation. And don't just talk about the consequences. Don't talk just about the punishment. Talk about the emotional connections that these things have and how it can be completely devastated with substance abuse. And then talk about how expensive the substance use habit is. I mean, because it's not just money. It's about your lifestyle, your freedom, all these kind of things. And Max is right. You've got to learn all you can about this kind of stuff, this addiction, and then never stop talking about it. Don't ever just think that, okay, I've had the sex talk with my kids, I never have to bring that up again. Yeah, you do. This should be an ongoing thing. I think that I've taken a naive approach to this kind of stuff, but this is what's happening. We have kids now dying at this age, and it blows my mind that we're kind of scratching our heads, kind of looking dumb at each other like, well, what just happened?
Well, Blue, you know what's interesting when you say that? Most of these parents that I talk to, they've had a traumatic event in their life. They've had a child overdose. They've had
Brock, you know why that
major...
is? This is what I think. Now here's the world according to Blue. And listeners, I'm so glad you brought this up, Brock. Now, I've noticed in my 20 years of doing drug and alcohol therapy, I've noticed some trends, okay? And here's the situation. If you have a kid or you yourself are smoking weed or drinking alcohol, chances are you're self-medicating depression. If you are if you're using heroin, the opiates, the fentanyl, this stuff, chances are you've suffered some kind of pain, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and that typically is a derivative from trauma. People that take abuse Xanax and those kind of benzodiazepines. Those are the people that don't want to feel good. They don't want to feel bad. They want to feel nothing. Those are typically people that have been sexually abused or hurt that way. Methamphetamines, the same kind of concept. There are clues to what your substance use is. So listeners, when Brock says that many of the people he speaks to that are having problems with opiates and this fentanyl stuff, they've been through trauma. Brock, I'm so glad you said that. Please continue.
So here's what I'm referring to. A lot of these families that I get to talk to that have been affected by fentanyl, each one of them has a reoccurring thought and theme. They always say, "I never saw it coming. I never thought it would be my kid. I was shocked. As a family, we were shocked we didn't have this involvement." And so a lot of people don't see it because they're not having these conversations. They're not being educated. And I'm not saying all of them. A lot of people do have a great conversation. They do have good connections with their kids. But you're right. These communications need to happen all the time, and they gotta be normal, right? Max brought up some great ideas. Hey, sit down with your kids, show them facts, be honest with them. Listen, I don't know everything about fentanyl. I don't know everything about drugs, but I can tell you when I'm hearing these trends that are happening with these youth that are dying, it's scary. Let's talk about it. So these are not always awesome conversations to have, but if you're not having them, you can be even if you are having them, you can be another statistic to it. So I just think it's really important that we have an intro, that we talk to them, we show pictures, we get educated, even if we're educating together, right? What I would hate, my biggest fear is one of my kids get involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, man, I'm at the front. I'm at the front of this. I'm trying to get ahead of it. We having these conversations all the time. And I know that our youth, and I know that we still get to make decisions based on who we are as individuals.
Mm.
I just had an idea. Maybe this can help parents that are struggling talking to their kids a little bit or don't know how to do it. Every once in a while, I'll notice one of my players struggling, and I'm not sure what it is, but I know something's going on. Or I might just check in on a player, and I say, "Hey, after school, come to my office." And they come to my office, sit down, we chit chat, and I go, "Look, man, I'm going to take my coach hat off right now, and I'm going to be your friend. And anything you say right now, I'm not going to judge you. You're not going to be in trouble. Like, I want to have an open conversation as a friend that won't leave this room, and we won't talk about it with anybody else." And then I go into, how are you doing? How are things going? Oh, you got a girlfriend? Like, hey, are you partying on the weekends? And just be honest, man. I'm not going to get mad at you. You're not going to get in trouble. I just want to talk to you. Make sure you're doing okay. And lots of times when I approach kids with that, maybe not at first, but they eventually open up about stuff. And when they feel that trust and the love and knowing that you're coming from a place of care and understanding, they'll talk to you. Maybe not the first time you try, but I've had a lot of success doing that with some of my players. And then when the conversation is over, it's over. I don't bring it up until the next time I call them into my office. "Hey, how you doing? You still struggling with this? How can I help you?" Those are the types of conversations that you need to have. Any raising of the voice or stern or strict or "you better not be doing this" or "I'm going to do this" or "you're going to be ground." You know what I mean? Kids aren't going to talk to you nowadays. They're not scared of you. They're not. It's different than how it was when we grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Kids have access to way more stuff and they talk to way more people. So that would be my advice to try. If you're struggling talking to your kids, create an environment, a safe environment for them to talk. And if they do come up with something and tell you about something, you have to prepare yourself to react the right way. If your son or daughter says, "Yeah, you know what, I've been having sex with my boyfriend or girlfriend," you'd be like, "Okay, let's talk about that. These are the dangers. Potentially get her pregnant. It's addictive." You go into all that stuff and say, I want to help you, and go from there. But if you're going to create that environment, you better be prepared for them to be open and honest about something and you better be prepared to react the right way, because if you don't, your child will never open up to you again. I can promise you that. So just some advice from some experiences that I've had.
You bring up a good point too, and parents. There's a lot of parents I've worked with that once they've discovered that their kid has an issue with substances, that they'll get the drug test from one of the drugstores and whatnot. But you also want to understand that what Brock said at the top of this podcast is that fentanyl is a synthetic substance. So these standard drug tests that you want to get, it won't register on them. Prince.
It won't?
The singer. No, the Prince, the guy who died, right? The singer Prince, he died from an overdose of fentanyl, and it became the most dangerous drug known to man. But you cannot test for it unless you do a more gritty kind of breakdown test in the lab. But you didn't know that. There's others. Tramadol. Tramadol was developed to be less addicting. Didn't quite work out that way. You can still quite frequently abuse it. It can't come up on a standard test. Some OxyContin, if it's been crushed and converted into other substances, won't register. And buprenorphine, won't register on a standard drug test. So if you do these things, that's great. It's just kind of a peace of mind. But until you take it to a lab where they can break it down and find the components and the derivatives of it, it won't register on one of those tests that has the lines that you can say, well, is that a clear line? Is it a bold line? What is it? Those standard tests, it won't pick it up. So you can't use that as your standard, I guess, measuring stick on if your child's using or not. You didn't know that, huh?
That blows my mind.
Mm-hmm. Synthetic drugs are hard that way. Like the same thing with spice. Like spice, you can't even test in a broken down test because it's such different components and chemicals. All they got to do is change a few things, and it will completely wipe it out. So there are some tests that you won't be able to catch it with.
Well,
Heavy stuff.
That's scary, because if you have a kid that you think is using,
mm-hmm.
How do you drug test them? You gotta send a sample into a lab.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing too.
Yes,
though. All drug tests do is keep you honest. That's it. So if you don't have that kind of concept or relationship yet, you got to start a little bit behind the curve. Like drug tests, in my eyes, when I owned my own treatment center, drug tests were the dumbest thing. And we can get into why that was a money-making scheme for so many people. It's ridiculous. But nonetheless, all it did was keep people honest. So, if people would use drugs and not, and maybe find a way to get around the test, you could tell, because I'm like, wait a minute, my gut feeling and tells me that you're off. And it's got to come from somewhere. So realistically, you've got to know your kids. You got to know your spouse. You got to know your family members. If you don't know them, you're going to have blinders on. You're going to miss. But yeah, it's not as easy as just here, pee on this stick. Let's go find out what you're using. It's, hey, I've noticed certain things. You're pulling away from the family again. You're isolating. You're kind of sharp to anger. Like, what's happening? Help me understand where you're coming from. But if you come at them with the control talk where you're wanting them to you can't be trusted, you say this, you do that, like you're going to break down all communication. So realistically, your best, I guess, indicator for if your child or your loved one's using is your gut. What's your gut telling you?
Well, you know your kids well enough, Max and Blue. Yeah. You can see the change in their behavior. And when that starts happening, that's when, it would be ideal to get them before that open up that line of communication. But when you see your kid pivoting, there's something going on in their lives.
Mm-hmm. But this is the thing, though, right? Is that's our kids. We get that. But for the common person out there who's maybe single parent who's working 24/7, that doesn't get to spend that time or get to see the intricacies of some of these things, guys, that's when I think it takes a village. This is where teachers, neighbors, friends of your children, it's time for us to start opening our eyes a little wider and start communicating with these young ones. It's about service. It's about educating yourself. It's about not staying on the sidelines on the sofa. Like, you've got to get out in your communities and start watching.
Max, I really appreciated the fact that you brought up that you work with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
You bring it. It's amazing, man. I wish every parent had an extra body, an extra set of eyes on their kids, because you're seeing it, and you could be a great advocate for that human, for that kid, But there's a lot of people that don't have that ability. They don't have that grandpa. They don't have that coach or family member or a leader in church or pastor. You don't have those people. And that's why this connection, we need connections. And that's what we talk about, how we save people. That's it right there, man, is connecting with them and talking to them.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think it's an important note for all of us that whether it's with our kids or other kids, it's important that somehow we are involved with youth. The more people that we have that can mentor and be involved with youth, the better off we'll be, especially for those kids who don't have it at home. And there's even kids that have it at home but just don't want to talk about it with their parents. Now, let me tell you a story. We had a kid who brought a vape pen to school. He was smoking weed at school through a dab or a vape pen, whatever you call it. And we caught him on camera smoking. And he had shoved it down his pants. So when we kind of conducted a search on him, obviously we can't go down the kid's pants. We can ask him to lift up his shirt, show us his belt line, stuff like that. So we call the parents, and the parents, this was their reaction. Not my kid. No way. Not my kid. You guys illegally searched him. We're going to sue. You know what I mean? They're missing the point. We're trying to help, and all you're doing is accusing the school. And I get you want to back up your kids, but at the same time, for you to sit there and be like, no, not my kid would never do that. Well, I was a BYU quarterback, NFL quarterback. I never thought I would do it either.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So guess what? They pull the kid out of the school, take him to a different school. 2 weeks later, he gets busted again. And I'm just shaking my head like these parents are idiots, basically. They're dummies. For them to act and for them to think and be that naive about their kid. So that's why I bring up it can happen to anybody, anybody's kid. I don't care how great you think your kid is. Everybody is susceptible to it, and everybody can fall in the right situations. That's why we're telling you to have the conversation. I don't care if your kid is the valedictorian, stand-up, most perfect kid in the world. He or she could have a bad day, and guess what? They could make a bad decision. So,
Yeah.
And that right there, Max, that's what's scary. That one bad decision.
Yes.
See, when we were little, when we made that one bad decision, it was that. It was a bad decision. It was stupid. And we live to talk about it, and we giggle about it today.
Yeah.
But our kids, and this is what we need to get the parents and coaches and anybody that's dealing with the youth and dealing with family members to understand, is this is Russian roulette. It's basically what we're coming down to, because they're purposely putting this into the drugs to keep us high, to keep us high longer, right? To keep us addicted to it. So when we have these conversations, it's not, well, you can try it one time, or if you want to try it, bring it here and we'll use it together. As parents used to say, the dumbest damn thing ever, right? My mom even told me, you won't ever drink a beer, bring it here and we'll sit down at the table and drink again. I'm like, can you imagine me drinking a beer with my mom?
No,
I mean,
dude,
silly.
Yeah.
But that was a learned behavior. That's what their parents thought. But today, our kids have to understand one time can potentially, and you have a higher risk today of dying from fentanyl than anything else. It is the leading cause of death in the U.S. Over COVID. And all we hear about in schools, messages from the schools coming across my computer every day. How many teachers are affected with COVID? How many kids are affected by COVID? What about sending out information through the school about fentanyl? Educate the parents.
You know what's funny, Brock?
Come on.
You're spot on. Here in a neighboring school district, we just got word, because we lived in that school district before we moved here, and an email came through, because we're still connected to there, and it said because of teacher burnout over COVID, that they're shortening the days and doing things that are kind of counterproductive to education, like they're going to shorter days. And so I'm thinking, if you guys had any clue what was really going on at home with these kids, it gives them more time. Here's the deal, though. You guys are bringing up good points. Now, my career and working with addict athlete as I have for so long, there was a devastating thing that happened on our team where we lost one of our very strong athletes. Her name was Carly. And Carly was a very dear, dear friend of mine. I mean, she was on the team for so long. She brought her whole family to the team. And on October 3rd, 2017, I'm in the parking lot of a grocery store to go in to buy some Halloween decorations because I'm like, I want to spend time with my kids. So my daughter Brooklyn was with me. She was just a little thing. She's probably 13. Right as we pull in to get out, I get a call from my one of my supervisors who says, "Blue, are you sitting down?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And he told me that they had just found Carly having overdosed in our sober living program. And you guys, my daughter Brooklyn was sitting right next to me as I'm hearing this news, and she could hear the call. The car was small. She could hear this mentor of mine explain to me that on my watch, I lost one of my athletes to opiates. And then she had to sit there while I'm in tears calling Carly's mom and dad saying, "Hey guys, I need you to come home. I need you to come back up here." And I've talked to her about that since then. And she said, "Dad, that was the first time I've ever felt what drugs and alcohol can do to someone," because she knew Carly. And so listeners, instead of suppressing this stuff, you've got to talk about it because everyone has someone in their family that struggles with this. And we're reaching the point now where everyone's going to have someone in their life that will have died from this. You've got to share this kind of stuff, and not to scare them, not to freak them out, but to show them that, you guys, this is a real situation. Because I know we're running out of time, but Brock, you and I were talking about this before. Let me tell you, listeners, what this truly means. This is a study that came out just today, the 1st of February, 2022. It says young Americans lost almost 1.5 million years of life due to opiates between 2015 and 2019. What this means is we've had so many overdose deaths, specifically through the ages of 13 to 25, that accumulating all that time, we've lost 1.5 million years of these individuals who could have been producers, who could have been creators, who could have been inventors, who could have been, like gurus in industry. But because of this overdose epidemic, we've lost over 1.5 million years of creative life. Just for that small group of people. This is truly like mind-boggling. Adolescents and young adults are dying of overdose. They're depriving so many years of community life, family life, and it's heartbreaking to even wrap your head around.
These years that you just gave don't even count the COVID years.
Exactly. Yeah.
It ended in 2019. Mm-hmm. That's the last stat they had. Imagine what the numbers are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're losing well over 255 people every day. Right now, in this hour that we've been talking, there's been 10 people that have died because of an overdose. It's real. It's real. But you guys, why aren't we locking down, this kind of pandemic thing, right? I don't know.
Well, and Brock brought up a good point. You think of the last 2 years, the hardship, depression that COVID has caused. People losing jobs, losing businesses, scared, sitting at home because of the government saying the stay-at-home thing.
Lockdown.
Lockdown. So now people are in a bad state of mind, and fentanyl is now brought into the picture. So yep. I can't even imagine, Blue, like Brock just said, over the last 2 years, what those numbers would be. How many lives were lost, how many years were lost because of this stuff. And I'm going to try to restrain myself here, but I am so angry sometimes at the world. I'm angry at the issues that we choose to focus on. We focus on the athletes and celebrities and everything that's going on there. We focus on this dang COVID stuff and vaccines and all this stuff. Yet the number one killer, we don't seem to talk about. Why are there not reinforcements at the border? Why is the government not spending money on the number one thing that's killing Americans? Instead, they want to focus on this virus that's nowhere near, even close, as deadly as the epidemic of drugs, and specifically fentanyl right now. I get very frustrated. I'm not trying to downplay COVID. I'm not trying to offend anybody.
For sure.
But we have something that's bigger here. And there's no money spent. There's no one leading the charge in the White House. There's no one doing anything about it. That's what's frustrating. That's why we have to do our part to talk, to spread information, and to mentor, especially, these young people between 13 and 25, right? Right, Blue? Is that what you said? Between 13 and 25 that are just dying and getting into this stuff. It's frustrating, but what can we do about it now? So I'm interested to hear. I know we're wrapping up, but if there's any last thing that we can tell the listeners of what we can do now, I'd like to hear that from you guys. Any thoughts on that?
Well, my thought is this. The reason the government's not getting involved is they believe addiction's a choice.
Yep.
That's what they put that out there. It's a choice. It's your choice to put a needle in your arm. It's your choice for you to snort that cocaine. It's a choice for you to do all this. The problem is there's some validity to that. There's some truthfulness to that. I get it. When I use, I made the decision to use, and I also made the decision to quit. The problem is this is a totally different drug.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The borders are wide open, and all what I would say is let's help these guys out. Let's make it not so accessible so the decision to quit becomes easier. But when it's so readily accessible and I can find it for $3 on the streets for an opioid pill, I'm staying high because the ease of the way, if that makes any sense. And so we're in this dichotomy where it's a choice, but we need the government's help to help us make that choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I agree with you. It pisses me off, Max.
Well, brother, you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. Fentanyl doesn't play fair. You overdose on opiates, you can get yourself a shot of Narcan and wake yourself up. Fentanyl doesn't work fair. Sometimes it takes multiple, if any, to get you to come back. And so
I have a question on that, Blue. Mm-hmm. Do those shots, how does that work with fentanyl? Does it work?
It does, but it takes a hell of a lot more. And this is what Brock's talking about when we were up here in Utah, when you were speaking over at Delta, is that it's taking multiple doses because it's so potent and so powerful. And so really what would really bring someone back with one injection is now taking sometimes 2, 3, or 4. And so it's
8,
running
9,
out fast.
10.
Yeah, I mean, you're running out fast. And so fentanyl doesn't play fair. It doesn't play by the rules. But the situation is, too, I think for my advice, listeners, is that you have to understand that right now we're kind of alone in this. The troops aren't coming to rescue you. They're just not. And so therefore we have to be the troops. All of us. We can look at these situations as a victim, and we can blame and we can point fingers, or we can be agents and take accountability, right? We can live in a world of fear, right? Or we can have some faith in what we're going to be able to teach our families. And I think we start looking at that kind of stuff. We can live in scarcity, or we can live in abundance as agents do. But I really, truly want you to know that the troops aren't coming. Like, we've been advocating this for years. 10 years ago, when I started as an athlete, we started noticing some of these trends. We're done advocating. We know there's a drug problem, people. Now it's time to start doing. And so it's time for you to start learning more. Attend the city council meetings. Talk to your community law enforcement. Get involved. Shoot, if it takes you going to the state capitol, you have to understand that February is a good lawmaking time. This is where we really start being able to push policy. Go to your representatives, your leadership. If you don't use your voice, they'll calmly just kind of roll past it till next year. You've got to get involved. The days of standing on the sidelines are over. The troops aren't coming to rescue you. We are the troops. And that's kind of the concept of why we entitled this podcast, Agents of Recovery, No Longer Victims of Addictions, because it takes action and it takes a lot of heart. Brock, don't you think? I mean, we've got to start using our voices collectively. If we all start putting our minds to it, can you imagine what we could change?
Yeah, we got to do it too. It's got to happen.
Absolutely. Listeners, you've been well fed, but this is just scratching the surface to what this topic is going to bring. Now it's time for you to do your own research. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, reach out to us. All of our social media content can be found on our social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, all those things. Reach out to Blue, Brock, or Max. We're always ready to have these kind of discussions. And I'm making a plea to all who can hear this. that if you want the Agents of Recovery to come speak, let us know. We'll be more than happy to arrange some kind of concept where we can get some voices out there with you to support this and maybe start changing the perceptions of what this causes. The troops aren't coming. We are the troops, and we are the agents of recovery.